process, the downtown committee is really highly engaged. So you'll be an active partner in this effort at every step of the way. And we have those meetings identified. One of the things that was asked as a follow-up to the interview we had on the 25th was a list of deliverables. And I'm not going to go through these. I just want you to have those as a kind of a graphic tool in identifying what the deliverables are at each stage of the process. And we can come back to that if you want to review that more. Project schedule, this was also updated just a little bit after our last meeting, just to identify the number of meetings. And so this shows that the process is about 11 months long that we're suggesting. And through that step we have, or through that process, we have 7 downtown committee meetings identified, 3 community workshops, as I mentioned a little bit ago, and then a couple of city council reviews or city council meetings, either for review or for adoption or approval of plan. So that walks through in a little bit of kind of graphic format what the schedule is. Before we get into community engagement, and we can go Q&A from here forward, or we're happy to kind of present ideas around community engagement and other aspects too, if you'd like. But I just want to mention the proposal, the fee proposal was for basic services around $80,000. And then we had 2 alternatives or optional services within our proposal as well. One was for exploring redevelopment alternatives for sites outside of city-owned sites or beyond city-owned sites. And that was in the range of $9,000. And then a second optional service, again for about $9,000, either side of 9, was to do a comparative analysis of peer cities, to pick 3 peer communities that you think are really good comparisons to Forest Lake and downtown, and for us to collect essentially some of the same information to the extent that we can collect that from communities. Same information we're going to be collecting for Forest Lake around investments, around retail sales, a number of other factors, and collect all those things and then compare all the communities that are your peer communities. So that's another about $9,000 item. So if you look at the basic services plus the 2, it's about a $98,000 plan from a fee standpoint. So that's really the overview I have for the proposal. And as I mentioned, we're happy to walk through community engagement at your pleasure, Dan, how you want us to do that.
I think so I think community engagement has had a fair amount of conversation, and so I think maybe that's a good place to start tonight. So if you just want to walk us through more detail on community engagement, and then we open it up for Q&A on that topic and all other topics, might be a good way to proceed.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Rita, and I'll just advance slides as she asked me to, but we're going to talk a little bit about the details of community engagement. Rita.
All right. So when we think about community engagement, we think about it in terms of kind of 3 different aspects. And this is a slide from the last time we saw you, and I wanted to keep it in just to kind of remind you about the elements that we talked about last time. We probably focused last time a little bit more on the virtual, just because that's kind of where we are at this moment, but we are starting to transition out from virtual into more in-person engagement again. When we put together a work plan and a scope, we see it as a starting point for discussion. So we certainly are open to ideas and preferences specific to developing the work scope. And then we also look at community engagement as an evolving element of the plan. We may put together an overarching, here's how we're going to engage the community, but we really see it changing and evolving as we engage the community, because new ideas, new approaches, new things may come. And so I don't want you to feel like whatever we talk about now means that's exactly what will happen as we move forward. So we had talked last time about Social Pinpoint. It is a specific software tool that we use. We found a lot of success with that. It is a virtual engagement tool, and it really provides an opportunity for folks to provide geographic-based feedback as well as ideas. They have a lot of different tools, including surveys, geographic-based ideas. We can do virtual meetings through there. We can have idea walls where people post ideas and upvote and downvote ideas. Our traditional method of community engagement is more the in-person. The virtual has, been a very important part over the last year, but certainly we love the meeting with people directly and having those conversations. So we're looking forward to the opportunity as we move now into the spring and summer, that we can probably look at doing some more community engagement in our projects than we have over the last 6 months or so. On the next slide, I brought just an example of the kinds of strategies that we look at when we look at community engagement. I've kind of group them into 3 types. One is just communication and making sure that the community has the information they need about what we're doing. So we recommend a project website, and then we generally work with staff on social media, press releases, to make sure that we're informing the community about what's happening all throughout the project. Then we look at virtual engagement. So the Social Pinpoint, again, is that website. It is an interactive tool. It's not just a place where you get informed, but people can actually place comments. They can see what other people have said. And on that site, we can do surveys, or we could do the traditional Survey Monkey if you're familiar with that. We certainly do those. We also have successfully over the last 6 to 8 months done stakeholder meetings and listening sessions virtually. We even have an engagement platform that we're using right now that provides an opportunity for folks to actually provide online comments as well as listen to the discussion. So we're able to do that. And we have had virtual open houses. As I said, hopefully we'll be starting to move into more of the in-person again, and that we will do in consult with you, where the community is at, where your elected and appointed officials at, where you're at, about how comfortable we are and what those need to look like. Traditionally, our in-person would be something like a pop-up event. So I looked up, for example, you have 4th of July, you have a parade and a carnival and a music. Maybe that's a great place to put up a booth while people are out at the community, if it's able to happen again this year. Art in the Park, I noticed there's a weekly farmers market. We've often used that as a means that people are traveling through. Obviously, that may gather more people than just Forest Lake folks, but those are also people you want to invite back into Forest Lake downtown. So it's not a bad thing to capture people from beyond just the Forest Lake residents and business owners. I noticed there's the Lakes Area Expo and the Lake Fest that the chamber's involved with. Again, there are a variety of opportunities, and what we would do is, as we come up to a new community engagement point that we want, then we start having those conversations. What activities already exist in the community that we could do? Do we need to do something separate? As much as we can, we like to do things, if it's appropriate, where people already are, instead of having them come out to a meeting. We also do stakeholder meetings, listening sessions, open houses, or workshops. All of those things are possible, and we can use the skills we've had in the past. They will have to look a little bit different with where we are, but given space and other elements, we can certainly hold those again if they seem appropriate. In all cases, we generally do some type of virtual and in-person at the same time, because there are always people that can't make our in-person events. So we try to put, as much as we can, the same information available virtually to provide that double coverage, and also just the idea of people have comfort levels of where they want to participate. So those are the types of things that we can do. I included some pictures just to show you this. These first pictures are actually during COVID. So on the left, this was just in the last month. We have a new park project that we're working on, and so we needed to find a way to have the neighbors. So you can see a little creativity of the use of one of the signs out on the lake, and people. We have the board that we would normally use in an open house. People could come and talk to our staff, and they could come and take a look at the site. And then on the right side is a bike tour that was appropriate for a bike and pedestrian plan. And again, that's something that can be done socially distanced. There are ways to do these types of things in person. So we certainly have experience with that. We certainly haven't done as much of that lately, but certainly have the ability to modify all the things that we are used to doing into events that can work for folks. And then if you move on, just some examples from before COVID. Again, we really have found the pop-up events in communities where people are already at to be helpful for projects. So you can see some examples of the boards or just some fun and creative ways that we engage with people that make people interested, so that they're willing to come over and visit us. So sometimes we have swag that we can give out that, again, you know, that always brings people over. So those are some examples. And then on the next slide,
I think we missed
our
one.
downtown framework. I was trying to remember. I had so many pictures to choose from. I was trying to narrow it down for you.
I think
So
this
I
is
hope
your
that
last slide.
the community engagement part of it, we're certainly open if there are specific ideas that would work well in Forest Lake. That's what we're looking for. We really use yourselves and staff to help guide us about what's successful in the community. And we certainly bring our laundry list of ideas of things that have worked and things that you can say, yep, that sounds great. And as I said, we'll try it. And then as we need to, we'll make changes with your guidance about what we should do the next time we have community engagement.
All right, thank you, Rita. Well, Chair Bain, those were the extent of our prepared slides, and I have more slides, but I'm guessing you have questions as well.
That's great. Maybe if you want to stop sharing your screen, it just helps a little bit to see everybody on screen. Although don't put it too far away. We might want to pull up one of those slides again. And let's just open it up for Q&A for questions. Thank you for doing the deeper dive into community engagement. And I suspect we'll have a number of other follow-up questions here on other topics as well. And go ahead, Finn.
Oh, thanks. I never know where I fit into the queuing. At any rate, I have a series.
Your hand up first.
Okay, I have a series of questions, if you don't mind, and some thoughts. If the city is open, and I'm presuming, according to state standards, the city can be open to meetings, small group meetings within the city hall. If that's acceptable, I would like to be kind of assured that the planning group is quite willing to come to those meetings. I presume always 2 planners coming, and in groups of 4 to 6, maybe as many as 8, to have meetings, because I love the outward community approach. It works. It's fine for the general community, but I'm going to focus on the stakeholders downtown. And the stakeholders downtown, I think many of them would really like to have that mask to mask meeting and really talk about their own personal, issues in this participation. I just want to be sure that we can really have a fundamental series of those meetings, because I myself would love to meet for a half an hour to an hour with the planners myself, with things that I might say after 20 years of involvement in downtown development. So if that's comfortable for them, I would like that to be a real priority in where we're going.
Well, I can say I can't wait. I can't wait. I look forward to that so much. And we, as Rita mentioned, we're already doing more and more in-person meetings now that COVID has eased a bit, and we just expect that to continue. So you can count on that.
Okay, great. I'm not inclined to adopt any of the additional services. I think somewhere within the scope of the planner's expertise and experience, and wanting them actually to focus uniquely on Forest Lake without any other encumbrance, because I don't think there's many that are going to fit the dynamic that we have here in town. I don't have any real value in those, but if you'd want to promote those, I'm willing to listen.
We really put them out there for you to think about. We're not suggesting that you cannot have a great downtown plan without them. They really are services that are above and beyond the baseline of a very solid and good downtown plan. So it's completely up to you. We're happy to describe them more if you'd like us to, but we don't feel the need to promote those.
Okay, well, you've gotten my opinion on involving those, so that's one person out of many. I'm the one here that probably doesn't view the downtown dynamic within the constraints we have given you. It's a very small geographic area. The amount of land that the city owns that's independent is constrained as well. The limits are certainly, the area is just small. We have the fixed objects that aren't going to change. We have the transition pieces that will change over time. And we have the open land that is going to be developed in some fashion over time. And so the dynamic that I see is pretty well defined. The infrastructure, you'll learn about where we stand with utilities. The major arteries are quite clear and maybe have some variation to them. And after that, I start to look at individual ownership. So I tend to head toward filling the holes with the logic that the holes need to be filled with. And so private ownership to me is terribly important. Those individual stakeholders that are downtown are terribly important. And that's why I want them in a conversation that's tremendously strong. So I think you'll even have some trouble coming up with 3 distinct variations that do anything other than plug another marketplace into that hole as you go through. Mm-hmm. And then when you move on to develop that final intonation of what you think is the ultimate plan, I think that's also hard to come up with, because I think the 3 variations might actually be the thing we want to look back on in 3, 4, 5 years as the marketplace really drives this story. Mm-hmm. And so those are my thoughts. That wasn't really a question. We've gone through such a transition downtown. There's the one building could add $20 rates per square footage, and now it might be $10 in the same building. The shift is now kind of weird, and I'm not sure where you're going to do your quantification on valuing the investment forward unless you reach out, based on prior to COVID and then after COVID with some suspicion about what might happen. So I think that's a clumsy place for me to think you place value. So I wish you well on that effort, because that's a tough one to put any kind of price tag on anything. At the end of this year, even, it'll be a tough place to put a price tag on. Mm-hmm. And so those things are the confusing parts that I'm hoping you can remedy with your planning. But I do see a very clear dynamic in downtown Forest Lake. And the 3 variables will be unique. And I look forward to seeing how far you can push this story. But I think it's going to be planting new and varied pieces in the same holes. Mm-hmm. So there's my theory about it all. And I'm just hoping we can, again, the final point is I want to draw the businesses in to conversations on a small scale where they can face you and talk about their personal wants. And I will arrange for those businesses to come forward any way that I can to help this process, because I want them to talk about their ownership, their future, and their businesses. And there are just not that many of them that they can't be introduced in a very personal way. Mm-hmm. There's my 2 cents with.
If I could respond just Please. On one of those points, it's not uncommon for us to maybe come to a refined plan or decisions about the public realm investments that the community is interested in making over a period of time within the lifetime of a downtown plan, but then leaving what I call flaps, but essentially alternatives on the table and within the plan for things that are outside maybe the control of the city. So in other words, private properties or even publicly owned properties that are being explored for redevelopment, just because a lot of times the market dictates whatever developer is ultimately chosen is going to have a large say in what ultimately gets done. So to leave multiple options on the table in the plan is not an uncommon thing. And I think that speaks to at least an aspect of your comments.
And it does, yes. And I think when we look back, as you do with these plans, because they don't happen all that fast, mm-hmm. You look back and say, well, it could have been this, it could have been that. And what really drives it then is the marketplace. Somebody decided they wanted this idea, this opportunity. And that's what really happens. So we got to just open that opportunity up to all those aspects. So I like the looseness of the 3 concepts. I'm not totally sold on refining it down to one final one. I
Great.
think your schematic presentation of 3, if done as well as I think they will be done, to actually enhance it with a final note, iteration may not be all that important.
Okay, great.
If I could piggyback a quick comment and clarification on one of Mark's questions, and then a follow-up question on one of his other items. So the city council did allow for the community room at City Hall to be opened up for groups of up to 10. And so that should be, amenity should be available for the types of meetings that you're talking about, Mark. And then just a follow-up question related to the additional services. When are those typically purchased at the front end of the package as part of the full engagement, or is that something that we can get a little further into the process and decide yay or nay on some of those additional services as we become more informed about our own particular needs?
Actually, it varies a little bit with both of them, because the one that is the comparative analysis, that's analysis that really is beneficial to the process if it's done at the front end. So that one kind of is, but the alternatives analysis really won't come until at least midway through the process.
Okay.
So that one is more flexible. I would say though, with the comparative analysis, it probably wouldn't make sense for this particular process to do that unless you decided to do it at the front end.
At the front end. Okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Karen, I see you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, I've been in and out of these meetings and there've been different boundaries. When we're talking about the downtown, what boundaries are we in? From Mallard's to Broadway, or does it go down to 8th? Where does it end?
Yeah, Dan, you want to?
Yeah, just give me 1 second. I got a map that I'll pull up and I just got to try to find it here in my files.
While Dan's pulling that up, let's go on to other questions and we'll come back to that one once he's got a visual. Leif, go ahead.
Yeah, Bruce, I had a follow up on that optional service about the peer review. Are those cities that are selected by other cities that have done this, is that aspirational comparison? Like here's 3 or 4 other cities that I think are similar to us, but they're a little bit further down the road from a development standpoint, and here's what's kind of discovering what's possible? Or is it true peer, like, here's where Forest Lake is and here's where this city's at, and like how are they stacking up in their current state?
It's totally up to you how you want to formulate that. If it were me, if I would advise you on that, it would be to kind of do a little bit of both. I think it'd be great to pick a community that is well regarded, well respected within your community that's out there. Whether it's whomever, Stillwater, or whatever community you really have high regard for, that you would like to achieve at some point in the future, aspects of that community, that would probably be a good one to include in that analysis. But maybe there are other communities that are kind of right in your situation that would also be good. And I think it's absolutely fine to pick from both of those categories. You probably want to pick communities that are relatively your size, or at least a size that you are expected to grow into over the next 10 to 15 years. So there are certain maybe criteria or suggestions that we would have about picking those, but I think it can be pretty broad. I will say one of the things that really matters if you decide to do the peer analysis or peer review, some communities have really fantastic baseline information that we can glean from them. Others don't. So that would be part of the suggestion that we would probably make too, is to pick communities that are really good at keeping data.
That's great advice. What other questions do we have? Or Dan, and pop in here whenever you're ready. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the keys to any project like this being successful is communication. And that was one of the 3 topics you talked about here on one of your slides. Under communication, you had website, you had social media, and you had news releases. Can you explain a little better about those? Because without the right communication and keeping that communication fresh, it's going to be very difficult over a 11-month period to have a successful project. So can you chat a little bit about what you have found to be very successful and what your expectations would be from the city and staff relative to this communication topic?
Rita, I'm going to ask you to talk about that in just a minute, but I do want to mention one thing regarding that. And communication, and that is, communication is a two-way street. So there's information that we want, as we're going through the process, that we want to get out to the community. And to me, that is informational. That's information we want to express to the community. The other aspect of that is engagement. So getting information and values and opinions from the community into us as we're going through that process. So we want to be conducting both directions of that communication chain. And now I'll turn it over to Rita.
All right. So there are a variety of tools that we've used, and one of the elements that we are at this point with communities is to try and identify the typical communication tools that are going to work and use them regularly. So for example, in some of the projects, most of the projects we do, there is some form of page on the city's website that is the home base for the project, and that can be kept up to date with information from this committee meeting, information about where we are in the process. We also have the ability on that virtual website, if we choose to use it, where we might do some online type of engagement, to actually have a web page there that is where people can provide us and information as well as exchange information with the community. So we typically look at it as something that we update, particularly around those community engagement points, but also as we move through the process and there's information that we are able to share with the community. As you're aware, when you're involved with some of these processes, sometimes you have to go through some time with the committee you're working with before that information is in a form that's out ready for the public to digest and be informed with. So we will have to kind of parse the information in a way and try and use your tools that the community is used to using as a means to stay ahead of trying to inform the community. So that would be work. A lot of it is going to be directed by yourselves and the city to let us know where can we put the information? How do we link people to that information? We will likely have a social pinpoint web page where things live, as well as a link to your website where more information lives. And we keep it up to date as we have information that's available for the public to review and to stay involved. If there's specific strategies, we're happy to include those in the process as well. The social media, we usually work with city staff on using your channels instead of introducing a new channel that's us, because our goal is that it's your project and people will communicate with you on a regular basis. We don't want to interject ourselves as the keepers of all the information about the project. At least that's always my opinion, is we're trying to build your sense of the information and your community buy-in and support. So it'll be that kind of working relationship, a collaborative working relationship with you. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Do you use, from a social media standpoint, do you ever set up a Facebook page or any other social media pages?
We have the capacity. We usually use the cities unless they don't have it, for, again, the same reasons, where we want the page to live on past us. And at a certain point, hopefully the goal is you're taking this plan and you're implementing it and you're living and breathing it. So we can do those things, but we would prefer to do them off of your city platforms instead of having it off of ours, that at some point we're done with and you're doing it. So we certainly can if we need to.
All right, thank you.
Maybe a good opportunity to jump in. And Dan, I know you're probably going to talk about kind of the city's platforms and our reach, and that's a great topic. Also, just a point of information for this group that you may not be aware of, but the city does have a new staff that is just started in the last month. And she is a split role between parks and communication. And so we'll be a vital resource to partner with Dan as we're working through that communication plan. And Dan, I know you've got some stats on our social media footprint, and you want to maybe talk about that too as well.
Yep, I can do that. And I did locate the map, and I learned don't reorganize your files before a meeting because I couldn't find the map right away. But I do have the downtown map that we're referencing. But to answer your question, Jerry, about the city's current channels. So we do currently have a Facebook page that has approximately 8,200 between likes and follows. So we have a pretty good reach there, 8,200 people there. We also do a weekly email that gets sent out. The subscriber list right now is 575 there. So that list actually has been growing in my tenure here. I think it started at like 50 and now we're up to 575. So we're seeing some pretty good growth in there as well. And in particular for this project, we're actually right now, Jackie's working with Nextdoor to get us set up on Nextdoor, the neighborhood application, considering that this seems to be a pretty good fit to really start to promote on the Nextdoor app. So we're looking at getting a government account set up there. So those would be the primary social media channels that we would use for this project, but also have a web page, and on our existing site, all that access would be there as well. So sort of bringing all of our current resources to the table so we can get this promoted as wide as possible for the planning group. And then I do have that map here, and I'll get that shared here. And just so everybody's aware, who hasn't been a part of these previous meetings in terms of this map, this is the downtown core. Then we brought this out to the planners. This was the area that we talked about. If somebody was asking, what's your downtown? This was the boundary that we set, which is 4th Avenue Northwest on the north, 3rd Avenue Southwest on the south, and then 3rd Street on the west, and then the lake on the east side. But these aren't hard and fast boundaries. These are flexible boundaries. These are sort of, it's not like kind of coming into a political boundary where it's like goes from one country to the other. These are designed to sort of, there's going to be a little bleed through on all of these as we kind of get to hit these borders. There's going to be times where that's going to kind of bleed down further to the south, further to the west as well. And then included in the scope that was sent out, we also put in this map here, which I apologize for the low quality of the map, but this was one that was actually done when we did our trade district analysis through the Humphrey Institute last year. It included also this trade district, the highway trade district over by I-35. So this was included in our request for, or the scope work that went out, because we didn't want just downtown kind of studied by itself without incorporating at least a little bit of acknowledgement of the larger area out there towards the west. So that's the primary areas that we're looking at studying within this current downtown plan. But again, these areas, these aren't hard and fast boundaries. These are just more to kind of orientate everybody to downtown. And then, if these are, kind of flexible to the east and west and north there a little bit, or excuse me, the west, north, and south, not the east, because you're hitting the lake there.
And I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Who are you talking to? Me?
Yes, Mark, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, showing the two map areas, it got me confused again. It's the downtown area I'm talking about. When you ask the planners to think about the other area, what are you asking them to do?
Be aware of it. If you're not familiar with Forest Lake and you realize that, there's a whole retail corridor that exists, not that far away, and we talked about in the past about the need to bring people in off 35 and get them to downtown. So there's going to be a little bit of flow between that trade district that's adjacent to 35 to get them to downtown, because not everybody's going to come in there on 61. Some people are going to come in via 35 and Broadway as well.
No, and sure, and understood. Any planner would have to acknowledge the greater surrounding, but the focus in their planning dynamics and their schematics will be the downtown area.
Correct. And when I sent this out, I also looked from the perspective that not all the planners that got it had familiarity with Forest Lake. And I wanted to give them at least a one-stop shop where they could look at it and say, oh, this is the two trade areas that we have within the city. Because
awareness is inherent in what they're going to do. So I'm cool.
Susan, go ahead.
Judy Huntash was going to speak for the Downtown Beautification Group, and she was not able to be this evening. But she did ask me to present a couple of things. And with respect to this discussion, The Downtown Beautification Group is a group that has a long history, a very long history in Forest Lake, some of whom have been business owners downtown in the past and have a really strong understanding of both the history of the downtown area, how it has changed, and are working actively in it now to provide upgrades. Some of you may have noticed these very large pots that change seasonally. Mr. Roberts has worked with the group and just done amazing work with us to change those pots out and keep them a really great focal point. Downtown Beautification Group would very much like the opportunity to speak with the consultants and provide their input and their ideas, because quite frankly, we've been thinking about this a great deal and what could happen in Forest Lake, our downtown, and how it could be improved.
Fantastic. Good deal.
Other questions? Go ahead, Mark.
I'm really hoping for more questions from more people, to tell the truth. This kind of gives us a sense of the participation that's at this level. And the open house stuff and the broader community stuff will happen as it does kind of organically. That's why I think the focus that I have is in the stakeholders in the downtown arena. I do expect from the planners to have a great awareness of our surrounding marketplace and bring that to the table. And so I'm still stuck on that, valuing the additional services, but we're going to talk about that later when we make a decision about how to move forward, I'm sure. The meeting forums that we might want to have in the future, do we work through the EDA? Me, for example, let's just take me. I want to talk to them a lot and I got a lot to say. Do I just simply bring questions forward to the EDA and then get allowed to talk to the planners? How does this going to work? Can I have direct contact? How does this work? Because some of the individual business owners that I know would probably like to, not be too formal about it, but know that they can come at a given date and meet on their own premise for their own reason. So maybe the meetings aren't all at City Hall, but let's say they are at this point in time, just to be safe. So do I work through the EDA? Do they work through the EDA? How do we set up the meetings with the planners? How do we go about that?
Bruce, you want to maybe speak, Bruce and Rita, maybe you want to speak a little bit more broadly around how does that project plan start to come together from a little more granular level, and kind of scheduling and kind of getting some logistics with some of the interested parties? How do you see that working, and how does that go through the EDA, the downtown committee? Just talk to us a little bit about how does that level of definition start to come together?
Yeah. Well, maybe let's see, to start, I think it'd be great to have an initial, I guess, either virtual or in-person coffee with each of you. I'll be honest, I'd love to meet each of you a little bit more at a personal level and get to know you a little bit, so that we have a stronger understanding as we work in this committee, as well as you engage with the community about this plan through the process. So I'm certainly open to that and would love that. I also want to make sure that whatever protocols Dan and others in leadership at the city want to put in place as far as communication, I will certainly respect any of those as well. So part of this has to do with the kind of the strategy that city leadership wants to put in place. But as far as getting kicked off at a more granular level, I think we want to identify who the stakeholders individually, as well as stakeholder groups, are that we want to begin meeting with. And the Downtown Beautification Committee or group sounds like is one of them. And it sounds like they would be probably great to meet with as a group, because they probably for the most part speak with a unified voice, I'm guessing. Okay, that's fair enough too. There will be others that we want to meet with individually. Business owners are a great example of that, because they have very specific interests. Sometimes they don't want their interests known by others, so we obviously will keep those confidential at their request. So as we begin the process, identification of stakeholders and getting those initial meetings and conversations set up is really task number one for our process and getting those started. But building a more of a personal relationship with each of you is really important to me as well. And I think it is to Rita as well.
Terrific. Karen, I see your hand up. Go ahead. And then Blake after Karen.
It's just wonderful to hear that we can possibly come in person and get to know one another and visit with one another. That's the best news I've heard tonight.
I know.
But as far as outreach, you know, I'm a member of the Rotary. We're always looking for a speaker to come in and share with what's going on in the city. And there's a lot of business people in there. The Lions are also very interested all the time. Community Ed has a great outreach for people. And so I think even the Everyone Belongs group that's just kind of in an infancy stage right now, if we can just identify some of those groups and be able to meet with some of them in person and share with what's going on, I would love to be able to get you as a speaker for Rotary if it'd be possible.
Absolutely.
So a question for the group that we've got some boundaries there with Watershed District. There's some talk about expanding the marina, so you have some boundaries there with the DNR. What kind of success have you had with working with those different agencies that are not city that we still have to abide by to help foster this or develop a downtown? Because those seem to be, at least the Watershed District, for any kind of development, seems to be something that the city is butting up against whenever something comes up or is proposed.
Yeah. So their regulations, whether it's the DNR or the DNR's regulations that are passed down into watershed districts, which is a really common thing, can happen both at the broad level, kind of at the downtown plan level, having to do with how we think about redevelopment sites and the relationship of redevelopment and infrastructure to natural assets, for the most part, water bodies, and setback requirements, sometimes density requirements related to those. But then where it really comes to play in the downtown plan is understanding those so that any options we develop, we have an understanding of whether they are within or outside of the bounds or the regulations of those outside bodies, and to look at possibilities really consciously, knowing that. But then at the granular level, once the downtown plan is complete and it's being implemented, that's where that rubber really hits the road for the most part, because then you get into issues of variances potentially, or the nuances of regulation. So I'd say at the downtown level, it has more to do with understanding the boundaries that they've identified, making sure that we know as we're exploring possibilities for downtown, whether we're within those boundaries or not, and for us to call out as part of what's being created, a identification of whether or not things are within those boundaries, if that makes any sense. Rita, would you like to add there?
I do, just because I work in 2 lakefront communities that have extensive and shoreland development, and I've worked in a few others. So particularly with the DNR, but also with watershed districts, I think it's hard for us to answer, obviously, very specifically, because we don't know your particular watershed district and what their focus is on. But we have had, including them in the process as we look and explore options, and then talk about what are their interests, and identifying strategies that can address their interests while also supporting what your vision is for downtown. We have been able to work with the DNR and watershed districts to identify alternative solutions that maybe don't follow exactly what the common shoreland regulations might be, for example, with the DNR, but achieve the intent of it in a different way, and but have been able to move forward and not have to follow those rules in that way. And then identify those strategies of how do you encapsulate that in the actual regulations. So when a project would come forward, you don't have to deal with the DNR the same way you may have had to in the past. I can't promise we can solve it. I can promise that we have experience and relationships with different parts of those organizations where we are able to have conversations and understand where they're coming from and try and identify alternatives that can work to achieve what they're looking for.
Who is the watershed here? Dan, I know I should know this,
Sure.
but
Comfort Lake,
Comfort Forest
water.
Lake, and I just
Comfort
want
Forest
to add something to that part of the discussion. As you all know, we do have a downtown watershed study going on right now, partnering with the watershed district to try to figure all out where the water is going to go. We met with them today. It's a really tough nut to crack to figure out where we're going to put all this water. So it's taking a little longer than we want, but we've been meeting with them, and hopefully we'll come up with some kind of a recommendations and solutions as we go forward.
Mhm.
Just to add a couple comments on that. Yeah, with current rules and current downtown infrastructure, we are facing some major roadblocks. Part of the discussion that's going to occur with separate and individual staff from the watershed later this week will be potentially looking at policy revisions that would allow the area of downtown to continue to redevelop as you're used to, especially like that northeast quadrant that we have with the newer commercial on the main floor and the residential above it. That would not be feasible to move forward with today's rules and requirements and sequencing. So we're looking at some alternative ways, because at the end of the day, the actual watershed of the downtown core area that actually drains into Forest Lake is very small in a greater area where we can do a lot of other enhancements. So we're going to potentially look at some policy suggestions, recommendations, and sequencing that a developer could go through. There's been some other large potential redevelopment projects that have looked at doing stuff in the downtown area. Particularly the last recent one was the greenhouse just south of and behind the chocolate store. And they weren't able to meet any of those thresholds, and thus that's why it stayed today where what it is a single family home. So we recognize that stuff after going through all the data, the calculations and stuff like that. Now we're got to just look at alternative ways to go through the sequencing and policy moving forward within a very small footprint, but with a greater picture improvements that would help water quality and volume control elsewhere. So that's just a little more information that might help you if you understand that.
And Ryan, are they being explored, some of the alternatives at the district scale rather than site scale?
Well, that's where some of our additional follow-up meetings will happen this week with other members of the staff that will look at regional areas to fulfill some of these offsets, isolated areas here. This study also goes all the way down to West Broadway, and then behind that Backage Road up by say like Norman Quacks and all that stuff north of there, and that all goes all the way north to Highway 8 as well. So it's a pretty large area of drainage.
Yeah.
And the area of concern is very small because of how overdeveloped it is, and city ordinance allows 0 offsets in the downtown very small area. And that's with the vision that is always wanted to be maintained is we don't want building and then all of a sudden lose a bunch of buildings and have infrastructure in the middle of that. And we want to continue that walkability, that storefronts, and then see how we can continue to achieve that. And it's going to take different ways of thinking and implementing stuff in the future in a very small area of a watershed.
Mm-hmm.
Blake, I think you had your hand up. So if we could go Blake, and then, well, Mark, I see you've got your hand up as well.
So I was just going to say Rita's comments. I appreciate that. I think that, those watershed district DNR, they're all there for a reason, but we have a vested interest here, and we need to push back to some extent. And I think having a planning group that's willing to help us do that so that we can still achieve clean water and all the rest, but to really help with this development, you can't be handcuffed the way that we currently are. So it's good to hear what Ryan just said, but more importantly, Rita, I appreciate the feedback there on your experience and wanting to maybe not, completely throw what they're saying out, but at least try to work with them and get a little bit of the ground there.
Mark, go ahead.
The watershed conversation has been ongoing for a long time. The restriction to development and a value in investing in downtown needs to sort of struggle with that. And so I think the pace of the planners, excuse me, the pace of the planners' investigation might be stymied a bit, especially when it comes down to their capital improvement investigations, until we can answer this question. Because in reality, if we can't put density downtown, I mean, really density, be able to take at least the same footprints, if not more, and go vertically, then you're going to have a real hard time investing in downtown. And so somehow this struggle has to come to some kind of understanding, offsite or otherwise, before I think anybody can say, here's what we can do downtown. So that might set the pace, and that might be a slow conversation to be realized.
Yeah, that was part of the reason I asked the question about whether district scale strategies were being explored. My experience, I think our experience in the past with watersheds is that their regulations, their regulatory approach on a site by site by site by site scale is often really different than when a community has a district scale vision for how it can address some of their goals. And that could be part of the exploration of the downtown plan. But it sounds like you already have work underway with the watershed looking at the downtown. So that's good.
I saw a hand up from Jerry, and then I think Susan, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead, Jerry.
I think this ties directly into the schedule. And I was going to bring this up before this whole discussion came up with relative to the watershed district. But Bruce, you mentioned earlier, and your schedule shows an 11-month schedule, which I assume is going to slip a month because this was starting February 1st, which we're not starting February 1st, so really March 1st now at the earliest. So that will push the 11 months into the end of January, if I'm correct in that. Would that still be your tentative schedule then?
Yeah, I think we certainly could compress this if need be. I would suggest actually there are some advantages in you allowing the schedule to go into January, partly because it would put the approval of this really important plan beyond the holidays.
Right.
And that can be a real advantage.
Yeah, that was where I was going next. To have all of this stuff happening in December is, to me, not a realistic and not a very viable option. So to push it into January makes sense. So
yeah,
I'm glad you're saying that, and I would support that 100%. Along with the fact that hard to say yet when some of these critical elements, i.e. the watershed district, will actually have enough resolution to it that you can actually start to move forward too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Susan, I believe you had your hand up as well.
One of our challenges is going to be short-term versus long-term. For instance, short-term, we might like to see lots more docks on the lake, but then 5 years down the road, it's all of a sudden, oh my gosh, we've got the invasive species, we've got overpopulation of our lake. So many folks trying to use the lake at once that is not possible. I remember several years ago on the short term, there was a developer who had to have a footprint downtown and get variances from our sidewalk standards. And now those buildings mean that our downtown is not very walkable at all. The sidewalks were so compressed that it's difficult to walk 2 or 3 abreast, or to have a conversation and 2 sets of folks, and it doesn't feel comfortable to walk our downtown. So as we look at our plans, yes, there are short-term demands and short-term desires as we try and develop, but we have to understand that some of those have longer-term implications. Mm-hmm. Unintended consequences.
It's really true. Every community faces it. And it sounds like you have some specific situations that we should address as part of the downtown strategy.
It will certainly come up. One of the points that you had made, Bruce, during your presentation was a checkpoint early on with council, potentially of looking for approval or preliminary approval of vision. So I certainly welcome that opportunity, if to the extent that we're at the right spot to do those checkpoints. I guess, though, when we're doing that, I want to make sure that we have brought along Parks, Trails, and Lakes, that we've brought Planning Commission. We've got members of the, this is a subcommittee of the EDA. How do you recommend that those other interested parties? Is there a formal check-in with those? Is this an informal invitation to join this group? How have you seen those, other successful communities bring those other important groups along in the process?
Yeah. Before I answer your question, I need to mention that Rita has an in-person meeting in Fridley. So she needs to bug out for
Excellent.
a 7 o'clock meeting. So Rita, thank you so much for.
Sorry to have to leave
saying.
you, but
Thank
need
you.
to go. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rita.
Yep.
So what, and I alluded, or I suggested the possibility of this. What I think works really well is for whether it's the EDA or the downtown committee to essentially convene a multi-group meeting every so often through the process. So if it would be possible to have everyone sit in the room together, and this may not be possible, so I'm completely understanding if it's not, but for all of the elected and appointed officials to essentially convene a meeting around the downtown plan. And for that to happen, I think I identified maybe twice through the process. That's what I found to work really well. Again, I don't know the dynamics of your community and whether that would be possible, but if it would, that's what I would suggest.
Excellent.
Yep.
And we do have some representation. We have planning committee here tonight. We have parks here tonight. And so there has been some involvement throughout, but I do think that more formal approach and that joint workshop will be important, and certainly happy to entertain that.
Okay. And if that's not possible, then for us to go to key committees, or obviously the council, but key committees, and essentially do presentations of the same material. And that I would want to have a good contingent of the downtown committee as well as myself there to go through that process.
Excellent. Other questions we have for Bruce this evening? Jenny, go ahead.
I'm not sure how to phrase this, but we're talking about the stakeholders that are already there. We have our beautification committee that's going to have their input. We've got the EDA and what we've gotten planned. How do you find potential stakeholders, people that are interested in moving to the city with their business? Like, well, for me, I'm interested in seeing an art gallery and art space here. If there's somebody out there looking to come to Forest Lake as it develops, how do you hear their voice of what their needs are?
It's a great question. So we have built into the process communication with developers, not so much with businesses though. And I think that's really interesting, Jenny. The thought of reaching out to businesses that are in, maybe they're in neighboring communities, maybe they're folks that you all know of, who should be part of our stakeholder set. And I'm completely open to that. I love that idea. If you or others on the committee or others in the community have thoughts about specific businesses that maybe have interest in downtown Forest Lake, and if you don't, maybe there are other businesses that we could at least get opinions from, and we know that this is possible, get opinions from in other communities who have businesses that are of the ilk that you would be interested in. For us to hear their thoughts and opinions, I think we should add it. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions we have from Bruce tonight? Bruce, this has been incredibly helpful. Thank you for taking the time again. Every time we talk about this topic, we all, it's a great opportunity to kind of gather where there's consensus, and it's fun to see the ideas start rolling. So thank you for taking the time. Dan, do you want to maybe walk us through next steps as it relates to this group?
Yeah, what I kind of gathered from the conversation. So, I mean, next steps would be to bring that proposal back to the EDA for consideration. I mean, obviously we have the prices within the budget to make sure, what's it look like from a budgetary impact standpoint? What are those, what's the consensus on those alternatives, those extra projects that they put in the scope? I can bring all of that, along with the, kind of the more financial analysis portion of it back to the March 8th meeting, for the EDA to consider, because the EDA would be the one that would authorize the proposal for the downtown planning. So the plan at this point, kind of based on the conversation tonight, I'm sort of still hearing that, what I'm guessing or anticipating is that this committee is still interested in pursuing with HKGI. I didn't see anything that was a major, or hear anything that was a major stopping point, in terms of the conversation tonight. I can bring back the proposal, to that March 8th meeting. And then that's the point where we kind of go through it and, hopefully at that point authorize the proposal. We could then work with HKGI to get their schedule finalized and then really start the planning process in earnest based on that after that March 8th meeting.
Sounds great to me. Before we move on to other topics this evening, any final wrap-up thoughts or final questions from this group? All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Bruce. Susan, the downtown group did have some other questions I think that you wanted to ask tonight. Just wanted to make sure we had that opportunity.
Thank you. And as I said, Judy Huntosh was going to bring these up, representative of the group, but was not able to be here this evening. Last fall, the group had, the beautification group had gone out and found a financial donor for a sculpture in downtown. And we wanted to know where is the city on the location of that. We have tried to make the artist available. The artist is very well, having done city installations in the past, some of the safety and insurance and those kinds of requirements. But we really like very much to know where the city is at in our proposal and what our next step should be, so that we can, when spring comes, it will sometime, maybe, have an installation completed.
Thank you, Susan. I also had an opportunity to recently have coffee with Connie and Jerry, so it was great to catch up with them. Dan, do you want to maybe talk about some of the next steps related to the proposal and the sculpture?
Yep. No, I think it's we're still open to having those conversations of getting that location determined and getting sort of that long-term, plan for that sculpture there. I mean, if you recall back when this thing first started, it was brought up with the need for the city to have the memorial policy or a sculpture policy in place moving forward. But also at the end of that meeting, we made sure to decouple this particular installation from that larger policy. So we didn't want that larger policy to slow down this particular installation. So the city is still willing to have those conversations on placement, on making sure that we have all those things in place to get this particular piece installed within the city, given the fact that this is one that is here. And then on the long-term policy discussion that has been added to the Park Lakes and Trail, they're going to start looking at what it takes to get that monument policy in place. So while we're working on a long-term monument policy, that's not going to basically prevent this particular sculpture from being installed. So happy to work with the group to get that location determined, get that nailed down, and get everything ready to go for a spring installation of this particular piece. So willing to have those conversations, and whenever we can get those meetings scheduled, happy to do so we can get that taken care of in 2021.
I will also add, I think there was some questions on, go ahead, Susan.
For the rest of the group members, this is not something that is 60 feet tall and 40 feet around. It is a sculpture with a series of various fishes that are found in Forest Lake. It's fairly unique. It's kind of a fun sculpture, but it can be placed so that it is permanent, but it would not take more than two men and a boy, my grandma used to say, to move that if it needed to be moved, for instance, away from a particular park location.
I think also there was some question on location of that, and so one of my pieces of advice is we should get that in front of parks, trails, and lakes, just as it's part of what they do, and wanted to certainly make sure they were on board and certainly get their questions answered as well. Karen, go ahead. Oh, and you're on mute.
I'm glad to hear that, because I will certainly bring it up to the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission. We haven't spoken of it or heard that it was anything in our realm as yet. And as far as location, we'd be happy to weigh in on that. And I'm so happy to see it still on everyone's plate, because I think for all parties involved when it started, this was a very positive event. And I'm glad to see it still going forward.
All right, that was the last of our planned agenda items this evening. I'll just pause and ask if there was anything else tonight. All right, not seeing any, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion from Karen Moorhead. Is there a second?
Second.
And a second from Leif Anderson. And Karen, could you do a quick roll call for adjournment, please?
Member Roberts,
Aye.
Member Husnick,
Aye.
Member Finneman,
Aye.
Member Lorge,
Aye.
Member Erickson,
Aye.
and President Bain.
Aye. Thank you, everybody, for the participation tonight. And we are adjourned. Have a good evening.
Thank you all.